people, often silently. Visceral fat. It's not the fat you can pinch. It's the dangerous fat that wraps around your organs, deep inside your abdomen. It's linked to everything from type 2 diabetes and heart disease to cognitive decline and even cancer. But here's the truth. This is not your fate. You have the power to reverse it. And today, I'm going to walk you through 6 proven habits that can help you eliminate visceral fat, not through gimmicks or fads, but through science-backed action. These are not quick fixes. They are sustainable shifts. When practiced consistently, they don't just eliminate visceral fat. They reshape your health, your energy, your mood, and your life. Most people don't realize this. But some of the most powerful changes in body composition, particularly when it comes to eliminating visceral fat, don't start in the gym or the kitchen. They begin the moment you wake up. What you do in the first hour of your day creates a cascade of hormonal and metabolic signals that shape how your body burns or stores fat, especially the dangerous kind that wraps around your internal organs. One of the most potent tools available, and it's incredibly simple, is fasted morning movement. Not high-intensity exercise, not hours of cardio, but low to moderate intensity movement done before your first meal of the day. This window of time right after waking is a unique physiological state. Insulin is at its lowest levels. Cortisol is naturally elevated, which primes your body to be alert and active. And your body is more inclined to use stored energy, particularly fat, as fuel. This is especially true for visceral fat, which is more metabolically active and more responsive to hormonal signals than the subcutaneous fat that lies just under the skin. When you move during this early fasted state, whether it's a 30-minute walk, a light jog, yoga, or a resistance-based bodyweight circuit, you're tapping into a fat-burning pathway that's already been turned on by your biology. What's happening under the surface is significant. As you begin to move, your body ramps up the release of catecholamines, hormones like epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are known to mobilize fat stores. These hormones bind to receptors on fat cells, signaling them to break down triglycerides into free fatty acids that can be used as fuel. And here's the kicker. Visceral fat cells are particularly rich in receptors for these catecholamines, meaning they're more likely to respond to this fat-burning signal. In a fasted state, especially in the morning, growth hormone is also elevated. This hormone not only preserves lean muscle mass while you burn fat, but it also promotes the breakdown of fat itself. Together, growth hormone and catecholamines create an internal environment where fat oxidation, the burning of fat for energy, becomes highly efficient. Now, when people think of exercise for fat loss, they often picture intense workouts that leave them gasping for air. But in this fasted state, it's not about intensity. It's about consistency and rhythm. A brisk 20 to 40-minute walk, repeated daily, can lead to substantial changes in visceral fat over time. The reason? You're building metabolic flexibility, your body's ability to efficiently switch between using carbohydrates and fats as its primary energy source. This flexibility is key to long-term fat loss, metabolic health, and overall energy regulation. And there's more. Light exposure during this early movement session has an added benefit. Natural sunlight entering your eyes in the morning helps regulate your circadian rhythm, which governs not only your sleep-wake cycle, but also your metabolism. It reinforces the timing of key hormones like cortisol, melatonin, and insulin. When you get sunlight exposure early in the day, you improve sleep quality later that night, which in turn reduces cortisol, improves insulin sensitivity, and supports fat loss. It's a feedback loop that starts with simply stepping outside and moving. There's also a psychological dimension to this. When you start your day with intentional movement, it reinforces discipline, primes your brain for focus, and aligns your actions with your goals. That early act of self-regulation, delaying gratification, postponing food, engaging your body, triggers neural circuits associated with motivation and reward. You begin your day with momentum. You start from a place of control. And when you start from that place, the decisions you make throughout the rest of the day about food, stress, work, or sleep are more likely to align with your long-term health. But let's get practical for a moment. What does this look like in daily life? You wake up. No need to rush. Hydrate. Maybe with water and electrolytes. Skip the coffee for the first 60 to 90 minutes. Let your cortisol naturally rise. Put on your shoes, step outside, and begin to move. That movement can be a walk around the block, a few flights of stairs, or a short body weight circuit. Squats, push-ups, lunges. It's not about breaking records. It's about signaling to your body that the day has begun, and energy will be used, not stored. If you're someone who struggles with energy crashes in the afternoon or cravings late at night, this early movement routine can begin to correct those issues. The reason is grounded in circadian biology. Morning movement activates the sympathetic nervous system in a healthy way, raising body temperature, alertness, and metabolic rate, and helping your body established when the day begins. This anchors your internal clock, which influences everything from digestive enzyme release to fat storage patterns. In studies comparing individuals who exercised fasted versus those who exercised after eating, the fasted group consistently showed greater reductions in body fat, and more specifically visceral fat. Even when total calories were equal and exercise intensity was matched, the timing made a difference. That's the power of aligning with your biology. And for those concerned about muscle loss during fasted exercise, keep in mind that low to moderate intensity fasted movement, especially when supported by adequate protein intake throughout the day, does not lead to muscle breakdown. In fact, it supports the preservation of lean mass by enhancing hormonal profiles that favor anabolism, such as increased growth hormone and improved insulin sensitivity post-meal. Another benefit that often goes unrecognized is that fasted movement trains your body to become more efficient at accessing stored fat, even during later meals or during sedentary periods. You're essentially teaching your metabolism to rely less on quick-burning carbohydrates and more on long-lasting, stable energy from FANG. This not only improves energy stability throughout the day, but also decreases the tendency for fat to accumulate around the organs. It's important to note that this practice isn't about skipping breakfast entirely or pushing your body into starvation. It's about creating a small window, 30 to 60 minutes, where your body can finish its overnight maintenance, complete its fat burning phase, and fully transition into the active part of your day. Once that movement is done, you can refuel with a nutrient-dense meal, ideally one rich in protein and healthy fats, and your body will be more insulin sensitive and primed to use those nutrients effectively. This is a sustainable habit. It doesn't require a gym membership. It doesn't demand hours of your time. It works whether you're at home, on the road, or adjusting to a new routine. What matters most is consistency, because the body doesn't respond to what you do occasionally. It responds to what you do consistently. And a consistent habit of fasted morning movement sends a clear daily message to your metabolism: and burn, don't store. It's also worth mentioning that the mental clarity that comes from this habit is often immediate. Movement, especially in natural light, increases dopamine, a neurotransmitter involved in motivation, mood, and focus. Many people find that their most productive creative thinking happens after these morning sessions. That's not a coincidence. That's brain chemistry responding to movement, light, and purpose. Over time, this habit becomes something more than just a tool to eliminate fat. It becomes a foundation, a keystone habit that supports better choices across every domain of your health. You start to feel better. You sleep better, you show up more present and more energized, and that's when the deeper transformation begins. We often search for complex solutions, thinking the more elaborate something is, the more effective it must be. But in physiology, the opposite is often true. The most profound changes come from simple actions applied with precision and discipline. Fasted morning movement is one of those actions. It's not about doing more. It's about doing the right thing at the right time consistently. And when you get that right, everything else starts to align. If you do nothing else, no supplements, no extreme, no biohacks, and you just commit to 20 to 30 minutes of fasted movement each morning, the impact on your visceral fat levels over time will be real, measurable, and lasting. The path to reclaiming your metabolic health doesn't begin with complexity. It begins with clarity. It begins with movement. Let's take a moment and consider something simple yet profoundly powerful. When you eat can matter just as much as what you eat. Most people focus entirely on the foods they put into their body. Cutting carbs, counting calories, choosing organic, avoiding sugar. And while those things certainly have their place, they often miss a fundamental truth about human physiology. Your body doesn't process food the same way throughout the entire day. The timing of your meal sends a message to your brain and your organs about whether to store energy or burn it, whether to build tissue or break it down, whether to increase inflammation or reduce it. This is especially relevant when we're talking about visceral fat. Now, visceral fat isn't just cosmetic, it's biologically active. It wraps around vital organs like your liver, pancreas, and intestines and secretes inflammatory molecules that disrupt metabolic function, increase the risk of chronic diseases, and even impair brain function. One of the key drivers of this kind of fat accumulation is metabolic inflexibility. When the body becomes less able to switch between fuel sources efficiently, leading to constant fat storage rather than fat burning. One of the most effective and science-supported strategies to reverse this trend is time-restricted eating, or TRE. This simply means consuming all your daily calories within a specific window of time, typically somewhere between 8 to 10 hours, and then allowing the body to fast for the remaining hours. It sounds simple, and it is, but the effects it has on the body, especially on insulin sensitivity, inflammation, and fat metabolism, are profound. Here's why this works. When you eat food, especially carbohydrate-rich meals, your body responds by releasing insulin. Insulin is necessary to shuttle glucose in your cells for energy, but it also has another role. It's a storage hormone. When insulin is high, fat breakdown is inhibited. The body goes into energy storage mode. But when insulin levels fall, particularly during periods of fasting, the opposite occurs. The body shifts gears. It begins to mobilize stored energy, including visceral fat for fuel. During a prolonged fast, anything beyond about 12 hours, your liver runs out of stored glycogen, which is your short-term energy reserve. At that point, the body is prompted to start burning fat for fuel. This includes visceral fat, which your body now recognizes as a valuable energy source. The longer you stay in that fasted state, the more efficient this process becomes. But here's where timing becomes critical. Studies show that our insulin sensitivity follows a circadian rhythm. It's higher in the morning and early afternoon and lower in the evening. What that means is that your body is better equipped to handle food earlier in the day. When you eat late at night, insulin doesn't function as well, leading to elevated blood sugar levels, more fat storage, and increased inflammation. Over time, this pattern contributes directly to the accumulation of visceral fat. So if you're eating across a 14 to 16-hour window every day, starting with breakfast at 7 a.m. and ending with a snack at 10 p.m., your body rarely, if ever, enters a true fasted state. That means you're constantly resetting the metabolic clock, flooding your system with insulin, and missing out on one of the most potent natural fat burning mechanisms available. When you compress your eating window, say from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. or even 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., you're not just eating less often, you're aligning your food intake with your internal clock. You're reducing the number of insulin spikes. You're giving your body a chance to rest, repair, and mobilize fat. This simple adjustment can improve metabolic markers across the board, lowering fasting glucose, reducing triglycerides, improving cholesterol ratios, and yes, significantly reducing visceral fat. There's also a neurochemical dimension to this. When the body is in a fasted state, it increases production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, a molecule that supports brain function, mood stability, and focus. You also get a rise in norepinephrine, which sharpens alertness and helps drive fat loss. These neurochemicals aren't just supportive of brain health. They also reinforce behaviors that align with long-term success. You feel more capable. You make better decisions. You're more resilient to stress and cravings. That's the power of shifting into a fasted state regularly. Now, many people are skeptical when they first hear about time-restricted eating. The first reaction is often fear. Won't I get hungry? Or I lose muscle? Or I thought breakfast was the most important meal of the day. But these beliefs don't hold up to the science. Hunger hormones like ghrelin actually adapt to the timing of your meals. If you push your first meal back gradually, say by 30 minutes every few days, your body recalibrates. The hunger you feel in the morning starts to dissipate. You become metabolically flexible, less dependent on constant food intake, and more efficient at using stored energy. As for muscle loss, the concern is typically unfounded when you're eating enough protein within your feeding window and engaging in resistance training. In fact, compressing your eating window can enhance the effects of training by improving nutrient partitioning. Your body becomes more effective at sending nutrients to muscle rather than fat. You're not eating less, you're eating smarter. And your body begins to reflect that change. There's a beautiful simplicity to this habit. It doesn't require count calories or tracking every bite. It doesn't demand that you cut out entire food groups or obsess over macros. It's not a diet, it's a rhythm. It's a way of eating that respects your biology and works with it rather than against it. And perhaps most importantly, it's sustainable. Once your body adapts, many people find they have more energy, clearer thinking, fewer cravings, and more stable moods throughout the day. Imagine a typical day. You wake up, hydrate, get in your fasted morning movement. You hold off on food for a few hours, allowing your body to stay in fat burning mode. Then you eat your first meal, something high in protein, rich in micronutrients, stable and healthy fats. You eat again a few hours later. Maybe you have a final light meal before 6, 7 p.m. Then you stop, you let your body rest. And over the next 4 to 16 hours, without any additional effort, your body begins to heal. It burns stored fat. It resets hormonal signals. It lowers inflammation. All of this while you sleep. This is the kind of intervention that doesn't just affect one area of health, it ripples outward. Improved sleep quality, better blood sugar control, enhanced focus and productivity, lower risk of metabolic disorders. And, of course, a reduction in the most dangerous fat in the body, visceral fat. If you think of your metabolism as a system of switches, on or off, storage or burn, time-restricted eating is the hand that controls those switches. It tells your body, with precision, when to store energy and when to use it. And the more consistent you are, the more responsive your body becomes. You stop fighting against cravings, against hunger swings, against the fatigue that comes from erratic blood sugar. Instead, you begin to feel steady, aligned, and clear. It's worth emphasizing that this is not about starvation. It's not about punishment. It's about rhythm. The same way your heart beats in a rhythm, the same way your lungs breathe in a rhythm, your metabolism thrives on rhythm too. Time-restricted eating is about respecting that natural cycle and using it as a foundation for health. Over time, this becomes automatic. You're no longer thinking about food constantly. You're not locked in a mental battle over what or when to eat. You simply live in alignment with the rhythm your body is designed for. And from that place, fat loss becomes effortless. Not easy. It still takes discipline, but it stops being a struggle. There is no magic pill for burning visceral fat, but there are principles that work. And when you apply them consistently, you change not just your body, but your identity. You begin to live from a place of strength, of clarity, of energy. Time-restricted eating is one of those principles. It's powerful, it's accessible, and it works. Discipline with timing is one of the most underrated forms of self-mastery. When you master your eating window, you begin to master your metabolism. Most people think that stress is just a mental state, something that exists in the mind, something you can push through or ignore. But the truth is, chronic stress is deeply physical. It affects every system in the body, your brain, your heart, your immune function, your metabolism. And more relevantly to this conversation, it plays a significant role in the accumulation and persistence of visceral fat. Not the kind of fat you can pinch, but the kind that wraps itself around your vital organs, silently impairing your health and increasing your risk for everything from type diabetes to cardiovascular disease to cognitive decline. One of the most potent mechanisms behind this connection is cortisol, your body's primary stress hormone. Cortisol is not inherently bad. In fact, it's essential for survival. It helps you wake up in the morning, stay alert, respond to danger. But when cortisol is elevated chronically, when your body is constantly interpreting the world as threatening, overwhelming, or out of control, it begins to shift your physiology in a direction that favors fat storage, especially in the visceral region. Here's why cortisol promotes the mobilization of glucose, giving your body quick energy to handle immediate threats. In an acute situation, that's a good thing. But when the threat never ends, deadlines, notifications, arguments, lack of sleep, financial worries, your body starts storing more energy than it needs, especially around the abdomen. This is a protective mechanism rooted in our evolutionary biology. Your body doesn't know the difference between a predator chasing you and a modern-day email inbox overflowing with tasks. It only sees the signal stress. And in response, it holds on to energy, particularly in the form of fat, to help you survive what it perceives as a long-term threat. This is why chronic stress leads to an increase in visceral fat, even when diet and exercise are held constant. It alters the hormonal landscape in a way that favors storage, not burning. It makes the body more insulin resistant. It increases inflammation. It disrupts sleep, which further drives fat accumulation. It creates a feedback loop that's incredibly hard to break without targeted intervention. But here's the powerful part: you can interrupt that loop. You can teach your body and your brain to respond to stress differently, not by avoiding it entirely, because that's not realistic. Life is full of challenge, uncertainty, and discomfort, but you can shift how your nervous system perceives and processes stress. And when you do that consistently, your cortisol levels begin to normalize, your metabolic function improves, and visceral fat begins to recede. One of the most effective tools for this shift is deliberate stress modulation. What does that mean? It means intentionally engaging your nervous system in practices that move you from a sympathetic fight or flight state to a parasympathetic rest and digest state. It means using your body and breath to tell your brain, we're safe now. The threat is gone. You can let go. One of the most immediate and powerful ways to do this is through physiological sighing. This is a natural pattern of breathing. 2 inhales followed by a long exhale that quickly reduces stress in the body. It's something you do naturally when you cry or release tension, but you can do it deliberately to create the same effect. The first inhale fills your lungs, the second tops off the alveoli, and the long exhale triggers a shift in your autonomic state. Just a few rounds of this can lower heart rate, reduce anxiety, and calm the mind. And when practiced regularly, it becomes a tool for keeping cortisol in check throughout the day. Another foundational tool is mindfulness-based stress reduction. Not in the spiritual or esoteric sense, but as a practical skill of attention. When you train your mind to observe rather than react, you reduce the emotional amplification of stressors. A stressful event may still occur, but your interpretation of that event, and therefore your physiological response, changes. Meditation, even for just 5 to 10 minutes a day, strengthens the prefrontal cortex, increases gray matter in areas associated with self-regulation, and decreases activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center. Over time, this reduces baseline cortisol levels and restores a more balanced hormonal profile, which directly affects fat distribution. Sleep is another essential part of this conversation. Poor sleep is a major stressor to the body, and it's often underestimated. Just one night of insufficient sleep, less than 6 hours, can lead to elevated cortisol levels the next day, increased cravings, impaired insulin sensitivity, and a greater tendency to store fat, especially in the visceral region. So if you're doing everything else right, eating well, exercising, fasting, but you're sleeping poorly, you're sending a mixed message to your body. You're asking it to burn fat while simultaneously triggering it to store fat. This is why prioritizing high-quality sleep is a non-negotiable part of reducing visceral fat. That means going to bed and waking up at consistent times, limiting artificial light exposure in the evening, avoiding caffeine too late in the day, and creating a cool, dark, quiet environment that promotes deep, restorative sleep. It also means cutting off stimulation before bed. No emails, no heated conversations, no adrenaline-inducing shows. When your brain and body can wind down properly, you lower your cortisol levels, improve your metabolic profile, and create the conditions necessary for fat burning to occur. There's also the behavioral component. Chronic stress changes not just your hormones, but your habits. It makes you more impulsive, more likely to reach for processed food, skip workouts, or stay up too late. It creates a kind of behavioral tunnel vision where you prioritize immediate relief over long-term benefit. That's not a moral failing, it's neurobiology. When stress hijacks your nervous system, it turns down the volume on your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for planning, self-control, and long-term thinking. And in that state, it becomes incredibly difficult to make the choices that support fat loss. This is why building a stress management routine is not a luxury. It's a necessity. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It just has to be consistent. 10 minutes of breath work, a short walk in nature, journaling, cold exposure, resistance training. All of these have been shown to reduce stress markers and increase resilience. The key is to find what works for you and make it a part of your daily rhythm. When stress is managed effectively, everything else becomes easier. You make better food choices, you move your body more, you sleep better, and your physiology begins to shift in a way that supports fat loss rather than resisting it. Social connection also plays a role here. Humans are wired for relationship. When we feel isolated or disconnected, cortisol levels rise. When we feel supported, seen and safe, those levels drop. This is why cultivating deep, meaningful relationships is not just good for your emotional health, it's essential for your metabolic health. Conversations, physical touch, eye contact, laughter. These are all signals to your nervous system that you're not alone, that you're supported, that you can relax. And in that relaxation, fat loss becomes possible. Even something as simple as music can help regulate your stress response. Listening to music you love, especially in a quiet, intentional setting, can lower cortisol, reduce blood pressure, and enhance mood. The same goes for activities that bring joy or flow. Painting, gardening, playing an instrument. When you engage in something that absorbs your attention and brings you into the present moment, your stress response quiets. And the longer you stay in that state, the more your body begins to shift out of fat storage mode. So much of what drives fat accumulation is not about willpower or discipline in the traditional sense. It's about alignment. When your brain and body are aligned, when your internal signals are saying, we're safe, we're calm, we're supported, your physiology starts to let go of what it was holding on to. Visceral fat is part of that holding pattern. It's protective, but once the threat signal disappears, so does the need to hold. When you create a daily rhythm that includes physical movement, controlled eating windows, and consistent stress reduction, you're sending your body the clearest possible message. We don't need to store for survival. We're thriving. We can let go. This is how real change happens. Not through punishment, but through regulation. Not through restriction, but through rhythm. Not through more force, but through better alignment. The body wants to be in balance. It's designed for it. Your job is to remove the blocks, the chronic stress, the poor sleep, the erratic habits, and create the conditions where fat loss is not just possible, but inevitable. When you learn to master your stress response, you begin to master your health. And that's when your body starts to truly transform. Let's talk about something that is so foundational to human health, yet still underestimated in its ability to transform your metabolism, your brain, and your entire physiology, physical movement. But not just any movement. I'm talking specifically about consistent, deliberate physical activity that is done with purpose and regularity. What we're really aiming for here is to use movement as a tool to mobilize and reduce visceral fat, because unlike subcutaneous fat, which sits just under the skin, visceral fat embeds itself around your organs. It's metabolically active, inflammatory, and dangerous over the long term. So we need a system that targets it directly and efficiently. Exercise is that system. Now many people think about exercise purely in terms of calorie burning. That's a limited view. While it's true that movement increases energy expenditure, the real value of exercise, especially when it comes to reducing visceral fat, goes far beyond calories in versus calories out. It's about hormonal modulation, improving insulin sensitivity, increasing mitochondrial efficiency, and shifting your metabolic baseline so your body naturally prefers to burn fat rather than store it. Let's start by looking at the science of what happens inside your body when you engage in regular movement. When you do moderate to high intensity exercise, you create a series of physiological shifts. First, your muscles begin to contract repeatedly, and with each traction, they act like sponges, drawing glucose out of the bloodstream without requiring insulin. That's critical. It reduces the workload on your pancreas, lowers blood sugar levels, and improves insulin sensitivity. Key factors in reducing the kind of chronic inflammation that leads to visceral fat accumulation. Second, your body begins producing molecules like AMP, activated protein kinase, or AMPK. Think of AMPK as a cellular switch that tells your body we need to mobilize energy now. It triggers the breakdown of stored fat, including visceral fat, to be used as fuel. It also increases mitochondrial biogenesis, the creation of new mitochondria, so that your cells become more efficient at burning fat and producing energy. This is one of the most direct mechanisms which exercise helps dismantle visceral fat stores. It's not just about burning calories in the moment. It's about retraining your metabolism at the cellular level to prioritize fat oxidation over storage. Then there's the hormonal side. During exercise, particularly resistance training and interval-based cardio, you see a rise in growth hormone and catecholamines like epinephrine and norepinephrine. These hormones stimulate lipolysis, the breakdown of fat, and redirect blood flow toward the core where visceral fat resides. In essence, your body starts to zero on the most dangerous fat stores first. It recognizes that visceral fat is more metabolically active, and under the right hormonal conditions, it targets it preferentially for breakdown. Even a short burst of high-intensity activity can have a profound impact. Just 10 to 15 minutes of well-structured interval work can lead to hours of elevated post-exercise oxygen consumption, during which your body continues to burn fat as it returns to baseline. That's the afterburn effect. And it's particularly potent for visceral fat because of the sustained metabolic demand it creates. Now, it's important to understand that the goal isn't to exercise to exhaustion. It's not about punishment. It's about consistency, rhythm, and metabolic activation. What matters most is that you move your body daily in ways that challenge your system just enough to spark adaptation. For many people, that could mean 30 minutes of brisk walking, or a resistance training circuit 3 to 4 times a week, or 2 sessions of sprint intervals per week layered on top of regular movement. Specific method isn't as important as the frequency and intensity. Your body needs to be reminded often that movement is part of your baseline. It's also crucial to get some of that movement early in the day. Morning exercise helps reset your circadian rhythm, lowers cortisol levels in the evening, and improves sleep quality. Better sleep leads to better hormonal regulation, reduced cravings, and improved insulin sensitivity. Again, all roads leading back to reduced visceral fat. There's a cascade effect here. Move early, eat within a restricted window, manage your stress, sleep deeply. All of it works synergistically to recalibrate your entire system. One of the beautiful things about exercise is how immediate its effects are. Even after a single workout, you see measurable improvements in insulin sensitivity, glucose clearance, and fat oxidation. Do that day after day, and your baseline begins to shift. Your muscles become more metabolically active, your resting metabolic rate increases, and your hormonal profile starts to favor fat loss rather than fat accumulation. But there's another dimension to this, and it's neurological. When you move, especially in ways that elevate your heart rate, you increase levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or DNF-BNF, acts like fertilizer for your brain cells. It supports learning, memory, mood stability, and cognitive resilience. Why does this matter for fat loss? Because people who feel mentally sharp, emotionally stable, and connected to a sense of progress are far more likely to make good decisions about food, sleep, and stress. Movement doesn't just change your body, it changes your brain. And that change reinforces the behaviors that create further fat loss. So let's bring this down to a practical level. What does a week of movement that targets visceral fat look like? First, include a few sessions of resistance training. Lifting weights or using body weight resistance builds muscle, and muscle is metabolically expensive tissue. The more muscle you have, the more calories you burn at rest. But more importantly, resistance training improves insulin sensitivity and creates long-lasting hormonal shifts that favor fat burning. Second, layer in moderate intensity cardio. This could be a brisk walk, a bike ride, a hike, something that keeps your heart rate elevated for 30 to 45 minutes. This kind of aerobic activity increases fat oxidation and improves cardiovascular health, which is essential when dealing with visceral fat. Third, add high-intensity intervals once or twice a week. This could be sprinting, cycling, rowing. Anything that alternates short bursts of effort with rest. Just 10 to 15 minutes can create a metabolic ripple effect that lasts for hours. Fourth, make low-level physical activity part of your daily rhythm. Take the stairs, walk after meals, stretch in the morning, clean your house with energy. Movement doesn't have to be structured to be effective. Every minute counts. It's the cumulative load that matters. And finally, don't underestimate the importance of recovery. Exercise is a stressor, and the magic happens during recovery. That means sleeping deeply, eating nutrient-dense meals, hydrating adequately, and allowing your body to repair. Overtraining, especially without proper recovery, can elevate cortisol and lead to the same visceral fat accumulation we're trying to avoid. So more is not always better. Smarter is better. Targeted is better. Consistent is better. When movement becomes a non-negotiable part of your daily life, everything begins to change. Your energy levels rise, your cravings diminish, your sleep improves, your resilience increases. And most importantly, your body begins to let go of the fat it was storing for protection. action because it no longer perceives you as being under threat. It sees movement, sees strength, it sees safety. And in that context, visceral fat becomes unnecessary. Movement tells your body a story. It says, we're active. We're strong. We don't need to store energy for a crisis that's never coming. And when that message is consistent, the body adapts accordingly. If you want to burn visceral fat, move often, move well, and move with purpose. Your body is listening and it will respond.